Jacques, Ollivier. I teach 5th grade at Valley View, and we picked,
I'm Patti, Adkisson, and I teach this year. I will be teaching 6th grade, 5th and 6th grade math and science at Ellensburg Christian.
And it's just a coincidence that, again, this year I'm working on an ecosystems unit. This unit talks about the interactions between living things in different environments. The first part of it, what they do is they build a terrarium, an aquarium, and they see how the items in them interact, and then they pollute it. And this lesson that we're going to talk about goes further than that in talking about transferring what they learned into a real world situation. And the real world situation is in the Chesapeake Bay. So I wanted to show at least a little of the video that goes with this to get it started. I'm hoping it's going to work.
So the unit is about 10 weeks, and this is at the very end of the unit, that we're going to do a modification for you, but the videos.
They have two nice cords, different things. Pugweed, walls barbers, these phosphorus and oysters, and soft shell clam. You just will say now 100% of our stuff comes from the water, snow farming or nothing like that anymore in these places.
Jacques, there we
It all comes out of the water, we don't get it. I live in along the banks. I think it's a lot more sport. I don't get a whole lot of keep out of hunting online. It seems like it's more fun on the water edges.
There's something about the edges that loves life. I'm a blue crab. I love the edges. I love the overlaps of the forest and the fields and those brushy creek bottoms that are in the seams of the landscapes. That's where you find nature in her greatest abundance and diversity. And there's no edge that's more special to me than the gentle merge of the land and water that forms our Chesapeake shore. We say the bay is about 180, 200 miles long. But you just imagine how that shoreline twines down through the marsh and the creek and the beach and gut and mudflat. You straighten out that edge and it stretch from here on past California and back with a whole lot left over. And that's just the obvious part. Once the land slips out beneath the water, it runs shallow for a long way. If you're to show the bay on a model, let's say like the size of a football field, well, on that scale, the depth of all the water in it would average about the thickness of 3 dimes. That bay looks long and it's broad, but it's thin. It's mighty thin. It's those shallow edges, warmed by the sun and fed and nurtured by the marshes, where so much of the life hangs out. The edges, that's where the action is. It's what gives the bay its character. It's where its personality lies. It's where it wants to rise.
And that's where I'll stop, which is good. But that's about a 25, 26-minute video that just gives kids more background on the Chesapeake Bay.
Okay, so for the sake of having you know where we're coming in at, this unit is, again, I said about 10 weeks long, and so we're coming in right at the end of the unit. So lesson 15 is like the culmination of it, and that's where we're going to talk about. I haven't taught it myself before, the whole unit. I've taught similar units in different school districts. But one of the things that when we were deciding what to do, Jacques was saying is that the kids don't always get the full application of the end the way that it's presented in the unit. So we wanted to modify it with some of the GLAD strategies that were presented earlier to kind of beef it up a little bit. So you would have a ton of background information as students before you got to this place. And unfortunately, you're not going to get all of that before you come to me. So we took Glenn's form, and I just want to touch on a couple of different things because it's pretty involved, as you saw. myself. But a couple of different strategies, and we were hoping to have the big screen so that you can see it a little bit more clearly, but I'll just read it to you. The Common Core standards explaining relationships, writing explanatory text, doing a report on a topic, sequencing ideas, and drawing evidence to support your reflections. And so across curricular, it would be hitting, the whole unit would be hitting mathematics, writing, reading, science, and then we would be doing some art with it as well. Essential question, who's responsible for the health of an ecosystem? How do different parts of an ecosystem interact is the unit question. The content question is, what are the relationships in an ecosystem? And our unit objective is to explore the relationships that link organisms to each other and their natural environment. And so we're going to be using some different strategies to get that across: gradual release, responsibility, think, write, pair, share. And at the very end of it, we're hoping to get some reflective writing in and really looking at some vocabulary. And the unit actually comes with a list of vocabulary that we would have covered up to this point that you would already come in knowing, so that you have just that little bit of background information. I'm going to fast forward to what we're doing now. We did find also that to modify this in the end, there is a gentleman who put together a very similar type of lesson plan for the Yakima River. And so we didn't get a chance to get all that information quickly enough to really put it together for the Yakima, but you could do the exact same thing with the Chesapeake Bay for Yakima, which would be more of a local application, which is more ideal. So that's where we would go from here if we had more time.
So how many of you know who Bob Tuck is? If you've done any river workshops around in the valley or the Yakima Valley, you would have heard of Bob Tuck. And Bob Tuck is the one that wrote the other version for the Yakima River. I'm not sure that it's been published and is out yet, but the lady in charge of science at the Yakima would have sent me a copy, so I do have a copy of it now. But before we would do this, one of the things that I learned when I took the GLAD training was that you want to use real pictures and you want them to be big. So this is just a quick example I put together. Would not be what I'd use in class. I would use more of a storyboard with full-size pictures on it. But it talks about the different pollutants that they've studied. They studied acid rain and the effect of that on their ecosystems, and also road salt and fertilizer. So this is the stuff they've already done. And then these are the different effects of it, causing algae blooms, which chokes out the other living things in the bay, and also when the grasses die, the different things that it does to affect it. Some real interesting facts on here. Only 1% of the oysters that started out in the Chesapeake Bay are still there. They pretty much decimated that population. And then again, the relationships between the dams, the acid rain, and how they affect the animals there. So I'm going to completely review this with the Yakima River, unfortunately, now that I have that information. And there are some pictures in that as well, but probably going to need some bigger ones than that. And when we get to pictures, when I went to graduate school, two of my classmates, their whole focus for their master's thesis was on picture mnemonics. So when they were presented in our GLAD training, I thought we should give that a try with this. So I have a sheet, and what I did was I took the statements, each of the stakeholders, and I want to make sure I use that correct vocabulary because it'll pay off later on. Each of the stakeholders in the bay, there's a sheet of information that tells a little bit of background about them, and then tells how they contribute to the pollution in the bay, what they could do to help fix that problem, and then they talk about trade-offs. So I took this out of the dairy farmers, out of the dairy farmers section. That dairy farmer section is also in the Yakima River one, along with Native American fishers and Hispanic farm workers. So our different version of it has more application to what we see. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up with a picture mnemonic. And the first statement is cow manure runs off into streams, creeks, and rivers. Do you want to give highlighters?
So can I just interject real quick?
Please do.
So lesson 14 is when all that picture mnemonic storyboard would come up. And now we're moving into lesson 15, which is the ending. And they're trying to piece together all the different points of view of all the different people that would affect the bay. And from there, they would normally have just an article to read, and then they have to fill out a form. And that's what the normal curriculum would have. But we decided to take that article and break it down so that they had both picture as well as written understanding of it and break it down into smaller pieces. So that's where we're stepping in.
To try to help them comprehend it, because I've taught it 3 times now, and it might just be me, but it looks like a fantastic activity. But the kids really, there isn't enough substance in that lesson as it is in the book to get them to the point where they really understand what they're talking about. So that's where I want to go farther.
We eventually will get to a process grid, and so you can or you cannot, it's your choice, but I brought green pencils or pens because dairy farmers, we're going to represent green. So when we get to our grid, we're going to do it all in green. So it'll all be picture coded. So when we're highlighting, we can highlight in green. So I have green pens if you'd like to use them.
Plus you'd like St. Patty's Day, right?
That's right.
So again, these statements are in that reading for each stakeholder. Cow manure runs off into streams, creeks, and rivers, all of which eventually drain into the Chesapeake Bay. The manure, a rich fertilizer, causes algae blooms, algae blocks off sunlight, and underwater grasses die. So I know that my content area is cow manure. So now I have to come up with a picture mnemonic for that.
That would be fun.
Yeah, and I did pick one also on the other one was just the hind end of a cow with its tail up. It's pretty appropriate. It runs off into streams, rivers, and creeks, which eventually drain into the bay. So I could have a picture of something drain into the bay. And I don't know the shape of Chesapeake Bay. Although I have sailed there. Eventually drain. And the manure, which is rich in fertilizer, causes algae blooms. Algae blocks off sunlight and underwater grasses die. So I like the bag of fertilizer. And then this would remind me of bloom would be a little flower. So the picture mnemonics will help me understand it. Now what I want you guys to try out is you can do it either with someone next to you, or you can do it in small groups if you'd like. Try the next statement. Like many dairy farmers, you grow crops to produce feed for your cows. You might use chemical fertilizers that also wind up in the bay. So with a partner or by yourself, highlight the words first and then try and picture them up. And then share it with your partner. Does anyone have one that they'd be willing to share?
You do?
Sure. All right.
I'm just going to do my cow that's walking around. Check it out. See, walking around and all the dirt is going into the bay as sediment.
Thank you. Okay, and then if we wanted to, we could have the third one. And let's go ahead and do it.
Sorry.
So read the third one, underline the important words, and try to design a mnemonic for you to remember.
Okay, for just as I was thinking through as teachers, for organizational purposes, when I taught science, we always had groups, usually of about 4, and maybe you already do this, but I always had tasks that were assigned to each student. So within that group, they didn't have a question as to what they were supposed to be doing. And usually I had a materials manager, a recorder, like a taskmaster person, and something else. So in a group of 4, they each were assigned something. And so that materials manager would have come up to the front and grabbed that material and brought it back to their group, and it would have just run like clockwork. So I wouldn't have had to have passed out all those papers. I wouldn't have had to have done any of that because they would have been assigned a task. So modeling wise, we probably didn't do that as well as I would have liked. But that being said, so in their group, they would have done this, probably in a group of 4, and they would have bounced ideas off of each other, and then we would have let them do that last one on their own. So it would have been grouped together, a group setting with just students doing it, and then you would have done it on your own. And then from there, we probably would have released you into the rest of like an article or something. So for reading strategies, we started with the picture mnemonic sheet. We're gonna go to a little bit deeper thinking with the trade-off sheet, because what we really want to get them to is to understand how each of these people, each of these points of view are going to be influenced, both in the positive and the negative, the they as well as how that person is individually going to be influenced. Move to this trade-off sheet.
And again, these statements come right out of the stakeholder.
Okay, so with your highlighter, if you would, in your small elbow partner group, let's read this together. Instead of using chemical fertilizers, use natural fertilizer, cow manure, to fertilize your land. What are the important words that we should circle? Natural fertilizer? And I probably do this in the green as well. Instead of chemical fertilizers, you can circle or underline whatever you want to do. And then in this box here, I'm going to have, we're going to draw it again. So instead of this bag of fertilizer, I'm going to use Jacques. I'm going to use the natural fertilizer. What do you think are some disadvantages of using natural fertilizers for a farmer? Let's brainstorm together.
Not enough cows.
They gotta pick it up. They gotta wait it, have to transport it, or
Okay, so transport the hoop.
Yeah, who's gonna pick it up?
Okay.
Shovel it.
With what? What do you transport hoop with? How does that look?
A big shovel.
Shovels, truck.
Shovel might be very time
I mean,
consuming.
I'm a scoop. What am I? One of those.
Like a backhoe?
Yeah,
Do you think
like
that's
one of those.
inexpensive? Do you think that's inexpensive to
Yeah,
have
so
a backhoe?
cost.
Do we have to transport it? It might be expensive to do that. What else? Oh, it's going to be smelly.
Your neighbors are going to be mad at you too, probably. Because it's gonna not just affect your.
Okay, that could be a problem for the neighbors.
Mhm.
Not enough cows.
Not enough food.
Yeah, yeah.
Or maybe too
actually.
much.
Yeah,
If you get that.
not the right amount.
Where are we going to store this?
That's somebody
That could be a
else.
storage problem. And I probably would make this bigger now that I'm doing it. Make my box a lot bigger, maybe half sheet. And then from there, so we have some really good ideas. But what is the advantage for the bay? Instead of using natural chemical fertilizers, using these natural fertilizers, what's the advantage to the bay?
You're not gonna be putting chemicals into the bay.
What do those chemicals do? Okay, so chemicals could create,
Kill things.
an algae bloom.
But I thought we just read that cow manure does that. No, but I'm not saying it. A chemical that's trying to grow something could also create that. But I'm just.
Well, the cow manure's already there.
Well, it could create death.
This is adding more.
Death of organisms.
Oh. Okay.
Chemicals could create death of organisms. organisms.
Right. And death in people maybe eventually, like, or problems, that all gets back to us.
So possibly,
Sickness.
because they've gone through this in lesson 14, they will have lots of ideas, and that will still be up on the wall, so we can refer back to that whole graphic.
I think a big advantage would have, it would make use of the booth rather than just having it sitting around. At least they can use it.
Yeah. You got the poop anyways, you do something with it,
Someone could make some money off of it too.
yeah,
The farmer could sell it.
sell it.
Okay, so in a small group of probably 2 or 3, I'd like you to together go through the same process of circling the words that are important, drawing the mnemonic, and coming up with some disadvantages and advantages for the bay. I'll give you about 3 minutes to do that for that second piece. Okay, so can you give me a thumbs up if your group is finished with that second one? And then we would have them go through the last one as well. But I'm going to skip forward. From there, we would go to a process grid as part of another reading strategy. So our 3 reading strategies were the picture mnemonic, and then the trade-off sheet, and now we'll move to the process grid. We would have already have filled this out in lesson 14, the contribution to the problem, well, possibly a few of these, but what are some contributions to the problem for dairy farmers? Manure running off in the streams. And we would go through this list of this and just have it up here on the wall and it would stay up.
Okay.
And we haven't gotten to any of the other points of view, but eventually we would be releasing them into expert groups with those points of view. It was funny when I was writing this out, I had written problem as not capitalized, and I'm very particular, even in science class, about making sure that they capitalize all the important words of the title, even in all my charts, graphs, whatever. And so I could possibly, I've seen teachers do this before, where they have a thing of candy or whatever. If a kid catches the teacher making that mistake, you caught that one or you did this one. So I should have just left it up there, but. So what are the solutions to the problem? What are some of the solutions to manure running off into the stream? You can use your sheets. Any of the sheets that you have.
The solution would be to clean up the manure, put it somewhere. Fence.
You guys didn't get to finish that very last
Still
one.
fits.
And we would have gone through this, but you can put them in big concrete steel bins, the manure, so that it doesn't run off to streams. So concrete.
Don't straight line.
Okay, so spread. We go through quite a number of these, obviously, from the fast forward. So what are some of the disadvantages to the farmer, to the dairy farmer? Extra costly. Costly?
Mm-hmm.
Any other disadvantages? Time consuming?
The reason that.
And I remember watching a Dirty Jobs show. And you might even show a clip of, there was a clip of Mike doing this dirty job where it actually was this exact thing where this farmer used the manure and he had to process all the manure. And it was a pretty interesting show, but even a 5-minute clip of that might help to reinforce that. And then advantages for the bay.
You wouldn't have that runoff that of the manure, so you wouldn't have the algae blooms and hopefully better ecosystem, more healthy.
One of the ideas I also was thinking of yesterday was to take a process grid like this and just have it blank, and you could just have it laminated, and it could be on your wall, and you can write with extra markers, and then just wash it off, so you're not having to make one every single time. I mean, if you're going to teach it over and over again, you can just have one made and do that same thing. You just rinse, wash these parts off, or you can just have it blank and fill it in for whatever subject you want to do. So I want to just throw that idea out for you.
So we have lots of sticky notes, kids really
I would
enjoy
put
putting
it in.
ideas in.
Right, right. You just do the sticky notes. That'd be great. Okay, so we've modeled that with them one time all the way through, and then we can break them into groups and do more of the expert groups with the articles we just released.
So students dividing up into groups and read and take notes on one of the remaining points of view. And again, from doing the social studies CBA, I'm going to call them stakeholders. I'm going to start encouraging that vocabulary right away. So there's 4 other stakeholders in this situation, and again, for the Yakima River one, there's also 4, but they're not all the same one. And then those expert groups get back together and they complete the progress grid for the class. And the intention was that the other kids would copy that and complete it as well. Correct?
Right, so an expert group would get up and present their information to the whole class, and we'd write it into the process grid. Whoever, maybe possibly the recorder would be recording in the process grid, the speaker would be speaking. So whatever you've assigned your kids group to do for each of their roles.
So every kid would end up with a completed process grid. And then the last step is reflective writing. And that's where the students write a reflective paragraph about how one group contributes to the base problem, how this group can help the bay, and the trade-offs for this group.